Beautiful introduction. Okay, so the talk is titled The Dangers of Stereotyping, and particularly the dangers of stereotyping in business. So without further ado, let's get started. It's great to see everybody here. As I said, what we're going to be doing is the dangers of stereotyping in business. Now, there comes a time in every young person's life when your parents, or most or many young people's lives, where your parents say to you, you need to get a proper job, yeah? Or indeed, you need to get a proper career. And that's exactly what happened to me many years ago when my parents said to me, Jeremy, you've got to get a career, a proper career. Now, the thing is, back in those days, we didn't have the sort of choices that we have today. We didn't have the web, of course, and I couldn't be doing all the fun things I do today on the web, you know, training and teaching and working with smart people. The choices, I say, were very limited, and basically they were be a doctor, which in my mind, far too messy. You know, I sort of get faint at the sight of real blood. Or being a lawyer, you know, far too much case law and a bit dry. Or being an accountant. And the problem with that, okay, there's money involved, which is a good thing, but I just thought that accountants were boring, yeah? As I grew older, I realized that I was guilty of massive stereotyping, which is something we all do very often, if you think about it. And in fact, I learned that Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones actually studies as an accountant, as did Eddie Izzard, the comedian. And I guess more relevant, people who actually used it in their business a lot was Phil Knight, founder of Nike, and of course people like Rockefeller, yeah? And as I said, it was a sort of revelation, but I'd really like to cover this in a bit more detail. So we don't just stereotype people or even groups of people or even nations. We actually stereotype whole continents. And one of the continents that we stereotype often is Africa. And often, relevant to business, we think of Africa as being maybe a dangerous place to go or unsafe. And it's true. It is true there are some places that are unsafe. But of course, the majority of the African continent, it's perfectly safe to go. I've been there many times myself. I'm sure some of you have. And the hospitality is amazing. They're very friendly, an amazing place to go to. So it would be a shame not to go to there because of the stereotyping of that continent. Another thing we perceive is that Africa is a hot place. And to be fair, it is a hot place. In many places, many countries, if you like, the deserts and so on. But it is not all hot, and that's one of the points I'm trying to make. You can't generalize to that degree. In fact, you can go skiing in Africa. There are dozens of places you can go skiing. And this is a place here in Maluti in Lesotho. Now, how cool do you think this is, you know, to say, where are you going skiing this winter? I'm going to Aspen. Where are you going? I'm going to Lesotho, you know, creds, major creds, much cooler, in many more ways than one. Wealth is another thing. I mean, we think of Africa as a continent, as a poor place. And it's true to say that 218 million people in the sub-Saharan Africa live in extreme poverty, which, to be honest, is a tragedy. But Africa itself, in terms of resources, is incredibly wealthy. You've got 75% of the world's platinum, for example, 46% of the world's diamonds, and 21% of the world's gold. Now, maybe it's a different talk, but of course that wealth often doesn't get to the people it should do. But nonetheless, Africa as a continent is phenomenally rich in terms of resources. Another thing that happens is we get stereotyped ourselves, don't we? I mean, we find ourselves stereotyped quite often in life. And in my job, I have to do quite a lot of traveling. And often when I get to an airport, I take a taxi, a cab, to wherever I'm staying. And one of the first things a taxi driver, maybe it's me stereotyping now, one of the first things a taxi driver often asks me is what football team I support. Because once they've established I'm a Brit, I have to obviously follow a football team. Or as you know, as you call it in the US, a soccer team. We call it football in the UK. Anyway, what happens is, what used to happen is I would just sort of mutter, you know, oh, don't really support any football team. And this would be met with a sort of look of shock and horror. So I found myself actually making it up. So I would say, I support Manchester United. And of course, that would be even worse, because then they would say, oh, Manchester United, and start asking me questions about which players, which would get me even into more trouble. So, I mean, this obviously isn't a problem in business, but it's to do with stereotyping. Now, in business, when we stereotype, we call it segmentation. Yeah, and we basically split people into groups, and that's what we call segmentation. Now, here's the interesting thing. We split people into groups because of the way they behave. That's real segmentation. But the problem is, if they are in a group and we make assumptions about how they behave, then that is stereotyping. Do you see what I mean? They're sort of two sides of the same coin. They are related, but they are certainly not the same thing. Now, this you can see happen in retail scenarios, like shops, for example, where often in a child's toy shop, you literally see a label saying girls' toys are populated by, you know, in this case, pink toys and dolls and things like that. And the boys' toys, of course, labeled boys' toys, you see things like, you know, construction kits and swords, right? I actually think this is really businesses being sexist in essence. And that's not a good thing. That is real stereotyping. Now, that's a problem. It's no surprise that my own daughters, I used to deliberately take them to the boys' aisle, and they now have a healthy attitude to and love of sword fighting. But anyway, that's beside the point. So, where does this all come from, this stereotyping? Well, let's just look at this a bit more closely. Now, there's an organisation in the UK with a wonderful acronym, WISE, which stands for Women in Science and Engineering. Yeah? And they did some research, and they found out that only 13% of the workers in these sectors, what's called the STEM sectors, that's science, technology, engineering, and maths, are women. Yeah? Only 13%, which I think is terrible. They also found out, interestingly, that stereotyping begins at birth. Now, you think about that. If only 13% of the workers in those science, technology, engineering, and maths are women, that's an awful loss of potential. That's a huge wastage, if you like. As I said, as it starts at birth, that's just amazing, right? Now, stereotyping also has rather subtle ways of influencing us in our work, in our business. And some research carried out at Princeton basically found that we decide on whether somebody is trustworthy by their face in 1/10 of a second, okay? So you imagine that, 1/10 of a second, we determine how trustworthy someone is based on their face. Yeah? Now, you imagine going into an interview and after 15 seconds being told, sorry, we can't trust you, your eyes are too close together, or your mouth is too small, so we're going to end this interview right now, because I don't think I can trust you. I mean, how insane is that? But you know what? That's actually what happens. That's what's going on often in an interviewer's mind. And again, it's about wastage. It's about all that potential. Yeah? So let's again look at this more carefully. Now, where gender stereotyping is concerned, there's a lady called Judith Williamson who wrote a book called Discovering Advertisements. Yeah? And what she found was that ads actually affect the culture of society. So basically, whatever's going on in advertising, and it's not just the media, there's also other things that affect our stereotyping. One of these could be peer groups. One of these could be socialization. One of these could be national culture. One of these could be the TV, what we see on the media. Yeah? So the media is partly responsible. So much so that in August last year in the UK, the Advertising Standards Authority brought out legislation which clamped down on advertising using gender stereotypes to try and stop it happening. And it's a very real problem, and we have to be very aware of it, yeah? Now, there's a lady called Mahzarin Banerjee, hope I got that right, from Yale, who looks at things like stereotyping and has done extensive research on the subject. And what she's found out is that there is something called automatic stereotyping, which we all do. And the reason we do it is because we like to organize things. We like to categorize. And the problem is, when you get over-categorization, that's when you get stereotyping. She also goes on to say how when we should, basically the way to stop stereotyping is to treat people more as individuals, yeah? And this is really important to business, as we'll just talk about in a moment. It's not just treating people as a group and saying, well, they're in that group, therefore they're going to behave like this. That is over-categorizing. We need to be closer to our customers, yeah? And what this is called in business sense is customer centricity. And customer centricity is part of the DNA of most of the successful disruptive businesses today. They understand this. I'm talking about the successful ones. They get that they need to get close as to know as much about their customers as possible and to be close to those customers. How is this achieved? This is achieved through data. These companies are data monsters. They basically gather as much data as they can in order to gain insights into their customers. And having learned those insights, then they can provide their customers with better experiences. And here you see a quote from Peter Fader's book on customer centricity, where he says, a wonderful quote, in order to do customer centricity right, you need to know as much as you can about your customers. And this is so true. And it's achieved by having multiple data points and gathering data. So, what does this all mean for us? Okay, so in order to minimize the amount of stereotyping we have in our businesses, what we need to do basically is be more customer-centric. What does that mean? We need to think about our customers as individuals. What does that mean? We need to learn about them through data. And when we learn about our customers, we find surprising things, yeah? We find amazing things. And we learn that actually stereotypes don't fit. A good example is my late mum. My late mum, at the age of 70, decided to take up playing the violin. And quite frankly, the noise was horrendous. Yeah, I mean, it used to sort of wake me up at 6 o'clock in the morning with this horrific screeching sound. But she also decided, at the age of 70, to drive to Istanbul in a pop-top Volkswagen van, you know, the hippie-style van. She decided this with her sister to drive at the age of 70. Now, I ought to point out that this lady here that you're looking at is not my mum. I did actually search high and low for pictures of my mum. But I think I'm making the point that we can't make assumptions of people because of their age or because of their religion or because of what group they belong to or even because of what nationality they are. We have to understand them in a better way. And that's what, as I say, that's what truly successful disruptive businesses do. It's one of the mainstays of being disruptive. Yeah. So not only do we create better businesses by being more customer-centric and focusing on people as individuals, but we also have more successful businesses. They'll also be more profitable. But what's most important is that by being more customer-centric and by treating people as individuals and actually respecting difference, we make the world a better place. Thank you for your time. Thank you.